Hello and welcome to the Booknerds podcast. I'm really happy to be back with another amazing author, and she comes from pedigree. So I'm so happy to report that we have got this book at hand. It's called Autumn Blossoms, and with us it's Gajra Kottary. And I hope I'm not saying the surname wrong. I hate to do that.
No, absolutely perfect.
Okay, cool. So first of all, welcome Gajra to the Book Nerds podcast. We try to always discuss some very cool authors and books, and we are glad to kick off the year with you because um, let me tell you guys, I mean, whoever is watching, that Gajra comes from a varied sort of background in terms of writing. She has been a screenwriter for a while now, since the 90s, since some of you who are watching weren't even born. So she has got some real pedigree going on. It's a great compliment to you. Don't take it otherwise, because she has written for some fabulous soap operas, which I was personally, watching in the 90s. I mean, sometimes I was forced to also by my mother and my sister. So Balika Vadhu and Astitva, all those amazing names. And of course, Gajra debuted as an author in 1996. This is your fourth book, if I'm not wrong,
This is
quintessentially.
my 10th book, Rohan, and let me begin by thanking you for that wonderful introduction. It makes me feel old, nevertheless, but it makes me feel wonderful. Thank you.
No, I got the number wrong because I was just counting the English ones. In that way, it's
Ah,
like the novel format. But I
right.
would like to tell you that I got it wrong because she has been experimenting with a lot of format, which I really appreciate in authors, because you have experimented with audiobooks as well, and some of them are on Storytel as well. You can always go on to her Instagram handle to check out more from her. She has also experimented with the ebook format, which I found quite good because many authors look down upon that and other the audiobook format. So I really love that you have explored all the formats. Congratulations on that. But coming back to this one, Autumn Blossoms, it's published by Om Books, the wonderful people. They are great friends as well. They are amazing publishers. They know whom to publish or not. That's what I love about them. They look at, I'm using the word again and again, the experience of the author. I really appreciate that about him. We'll get into that. We'll get into how what kind of relationship you had with the editor and whatnot. But okay, first of all, while reading this one, I was like, okay, this is way thick. Oh my God, look at this. This is like young adult format, right? This goes for young adult. And I was like, short story mein kaise padenge? It's very tough to kind of understand because right now publishers are like, short story, okay, should we publish it or not? But this book has got short stories from previous what you have written previously earlier,
Collection.
the
Yes,
first short
yes.
story collection as well, and then you have
Mm,
edited some stuff also to make it more relevant in the current context. So yeah,
right.
a bit about that, the genesis of this book, because you are screenwriting so much. Where and how do you get the time to fit in the author side of things, and how did you come up with this one? A little about the genesis, and then we'll go deeper.
Thank you, Rohan. Yes, it's rather unusual and different in today's times. I don't know why. I don't see the logic of the fact that in this day and age when people's attention spans are short, why is it that short story collections or short stories don't per se have that much of a market? So definitely there was this element of wanting to prove this wrong and get into the arena of publishing a short story collection and sort of seeing whether this works or not. It is a bit of a risk, but I had great backing, I must say, from my publishers, from my editor. So let me just share with you a very interesting case in point, actually. I started my career with short stories, ironically, not with screenwriting. So, way back in 95, I published a collection of short stories called Fragile Victories.
Hmm.
Then 5 years later, I published another collection called The Last Laugh.
Hmm.
Both these were generic titles,
Yeah.
not the titles of any particular short story,
Yeah.
because it would always be like a pattern that, when I finished a substantial amount of short stories and I would study, there would be these trends that I would notice in my own writing.
Hmm.
So, I published these two collections, and it is because of these short stories that I actually got a leg into showbiz, as they
Wow.
say. So that's the really unusual part. Maybe those times were different, but I remember my second collection. I'd just gone and given a copy to Mr. Mahesh Bhatt,
Okay.
and he passed it on to his wife, who was looking to start a television show, and she wanted to sort of come out of the Saas Bahu kind of shows, which was so popular those days. And so, in a sense, she's the one who has given me a break, and there was just no looking back after that. So it were these short stories that actually gave me a leg in uh, to the world of television. And then there were all these years, almost a decade, when I did not really go back to books. I got
Hmm.
so carried away. I was trying to adapt myself to this daily format, which
Hmm.
had just been introduced, and I wanted to sort of challenge myself whether I could churn out episodes day after day. So I did a show called Astitva at that time, and it was a very unusual theme. It was a story about a career woman, a doctor who had sort of missed out on her personal life, and at 34, she falls in love with a 24-year-old guy.
Yeah.
So it was quite a clutter breaker, if I may say
It was
so,
a
for
rage. It was a rage, if I'm not wrong.
yeah. No, in fact, Rohan, we the team used to think that a show like this will not last beyond 6 months because it's just too unusual for
Yeah.
television. But believe it or not, we were on air for 3.5 years,
Wow.
668 episodes. So that kind of emboldened me, and I felt, no, it is possible to do a lot of good work on television, different work. One mustn't, I mean, you have to try and break the cliches. So I tried doing that for a good 10 years. Things were working out perfectly. But I think somewhere down the line, I was missing my inner voice. I was missing, who I really was as a writer, because you get extremely used to working in collaboration
Hmm.
in television. You have a different person doing screenplay,
Hmm.
you have a different person doing dialogues, you have to make sure your producer is happy and you're not writing stuff which is way beyond the budget, or your channel is happy because the numbers are coming in. So you're constantly dealing with people, you're trying to sort of convince them. And I just felt that maybe I'm going to become what they call in Hindi na bhed chal. I'm
Right.
just going to be one of the whole thing. So I decided very consciously that along with this wonderful television career that I was blessed with, I should also go back to writing books.
Hmm.
And the short stories were, stories which had just sort of built up over the years. I'd write a story in between my little breaks or phases, and I'd put it away, and I had a substantial number sitting in the computer.
Hmm.
When Shantanu,
Hmm.
who has been an old friend from HarperCollins days,
Yeah.
and we, started talking, and he wanted to write about my television career and all the shows that I had done, and he kept, in the process of researching, he read the collections which I had written earlier, and he was very instrumental in saying that these should, if I have a couple of new stories
Hmm.
too,
Hmm.
why not bring out what is known as a lifetime collection?
Yeah.
So there we were with 50 stories.
Yeah.
And, sort of later we decided to organize the stories into three sections,
Yeah.
which is women's relationships with men, women's relationships with women, and women's relationship with themselves.
Yeah.
So the formatting happened after we had all the stories with us,
Yeah.
and we wanted to give it an edge,
Yeah.
the book.
It's amazing how editors can, kind of, convince you that you are awesome. You need that kind of editor, right? I mean, that
Absolutely.
confidence is needed. You need a team behind you. Anyways, so it was quite amazing, and I wanted to ask you something else, but this, entire journey, and I wasn't aware about this, so it's always beautiful to know about. That's the beauty of this podcast. You get to know about people so much, and the people behind the screen. It's just awesome. So books to screen was happening way back. I mean, it's not as if it has come along just now. It's quite intriguing to know that. So just from short stories, you can actually make it. It's such a learning. I mean, there are some people
Yes.
who discount that. I mean, there are so many new authors who think ki, okay, if the book hasn't done well, they get disappointed. But it might find someone who actually appreciates it, and just then a rocket ship like it happened for you. Amazing. What a start to the podcast. I really want to get into the short stories, and I wanted to start with the story. It's called Anyone's Blunder. Uh, that it I really appreciated it because I know there are so many, and the readers will read and they will have their own favorites. But this was my favorite, and the it was so heartfelt. I know there can't be many spoilers, but take us through the story a little bit, because it's hard to write emotion, right? It's not easy. And with your experience of, writing all those, episodes after episodes on deadline, with that discipline coming in, with knowing too much sometimes, that's also
Hmm.
something which I want to ask you. Is it tough or simple to write like that? Because you know too much now. How to bring out the organic, and tell us about this story a little bit with Abhay as the main sort of, protagonist.
Right. So one thing I must say is that, this particular story was written when I was absolutely headlong into television work.
Wow.
So I mean, behind the scenes, there's a story behind every story. So I can literally say that this was written at this point in my life when I was very raw, or I hadn't written so much, or so, कहने की बात, as they say, is this, that television has taught me that those two pillars, which sort of support your story, good two pillars which will keep your story strong. One is emotion and the other is drama.
Hmm.
And believe me, I am considered as a bit of a spoiler, because my emotion tends to run stronger than drama. And
Hmm.
especially if you watch television these days, there's
Hmm.
a lot more drama and a lot less emotion.
Right.
But that's another
Hmm.
story.
Hmm.
So these two pillars I've always been very conscious of.
Hmm.
And I believe my television writing has helped me to bring that into the
Fantastic.
short stories
Hmm.
that I've written subsequently.
Hmm.
The other thing about this story is, it deals with a very favorite theme of mine. The estrangement between a couple,
Hmm.
and how it affects childhood. In fact, I really have been talking a lot of late of, this. It's almost a campaign for me, which is called "Cry for Childhood," because it's all very well for couples, for young men and women to say we don't want to live with each other anymore.
Hmm.
But you just look into the eyes of a helpless child who's watching
Yeah.
his or her parents. They love the parents equally. There's an unconditionality in the love that a child has for their parents. They don't want to judge who
Hmm.
is right and who is wrong. And yet, even as they are growing, and even as after they grow up and they are adult children,
Hmm.
they have to make these choices and judgments all the time. So, to me, there were several layers in this story. It's told from the point of view of a daughter who
Hmm.
suddenly realizes that she's been told her father has been dead, but he's actually dying. Imagine a situation where, she's she's constantly going, it's like a yo-yo.
Hmm.
You think your father's dead, but he's alive, but he's dying, and what are you supposed to make? And then there is this whole can of worms which sort of opens up for her, and she has to make these judgments about her father and her mother.
Hmm.
And yet death is they say is a great leveler.
Hmm.
So death kind of brings out the kindness in every human being,
Yeah.
and it makes this young girl really grow up to realize what her father was all about,
Hmm.
what her mother was all about, and that ultimately these things are a tragedy.
Yeah.
There is no right and there is no wrong, especially from a child's point of view. So, my very first novel also,
Hmm.
which was called Broken Melodies,
Hmm.
in 2011, I had brought it out.
11. Yeah.
That too dealt with a very similar theme. So it's
Yeah.
something that I feel very strongly about. I mean, in all the clutter and noise about individualism and breaking out of bad marriages, everything justified. But how will we take care of the child who just wants a happy home? How will we sort of, so that question bothers me a lot.
It should.
And
I
the
mean,
thesis of the story,
there's no replacement for that. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, it's easiest, you can talk about it online and sort of, glamorize it a little bit in some ways.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
when you are just with that inner circle and that inner circle knows like what's happening, it
yeah.
gets really hard. And the aftermath of it, I mean, that's something else. I mean, people who have only gone through it will know that what has happened, and it has far-reaching consequences as well for
Oh,
kids.
yes, people
Yeah,
talk about childhood scars which, last a lifetime.
yeah,
I mean, they sometimes need therapy to deal with it because it's a reality. It is
yeah.
an absolute reality.
They
It's
become
not spoken
generational
about.
generational issues. Like,
Yeah.
we get like we all know that there are genetic defects which haunt us for like 100 odd years. But this is
Mm,
also something which, if it comes into the family, it doesn't go away that easily. So I
mm,
really appreciate that you dealt with the entire, short story
yeah.
very in a very sensitive manner and tried
Mm-hmm.
to give different perspectives. बाकी तो ये पढ़ेंगे रीडर्स और बताएंगे फीडबैक। amazon पे भी डालना है, वो करेंगे। और खरीद के amazon से या इंडिपेंडेंट बुक स्टोर से ही डालना। और amazon पे तो वेरीफाइड करके ही करना, क्योंकि वहां पे वो एक्सेप्ट ही नहीं करते, अदरवाइज बहुत टफ हो गया आजकल। सो
Mm.
थोड़ा रीडर्स को भी याद दिलाना पड़ता है।
Yeah,
सो
for that.
there's something that it was very interesting, and you have talked about it, I think so, in the initial part of the book also, that you have written little text before every short story. That was very interesting for me. It almost poetic, and it gives you a glimpse of what's there to come, but not too much. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
entices you. It's like the thumbnail to a YouTube video. I would compare it to that, sort of.
Interesting.
Not a clickbait, but it gives you a glimpse. And if you're interested, get into it. Because this book,
Mm,
guys, I'll tell you that you, I know it's good to sort of, read in sequence, but even if you
mm.
don't, it's okay. I mean, koi dikkat nahi hai. So tell us a bit about this, and I would love to read one. There was once a little girl for whom her father was the world, a girl who would rather be a man if she could. And I was like, ये तो पढ़नी ही पढ़नी है। वैसे भी टाइटल बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है। But tell us about a bit about this one. It was I was reading it at night and I was alone at that time. Not that I should be, because I'm a married guy. But that night I was alone and I was reading it and I was like, I was really heartbroken. Oh my God. I judge a short story or a book with the kind of emotions I'm feeling. I'm that kind of
Yeah.
reader. I'm very easy
Mm,
also
mm.
in some ways. So
Yeah.
uh, tell us a bit about this one, because it was like, I spoiler mat dena, but it's very interesting, this one.
Right. You're talking about a story called Not Man Enough,
Yes,
actually.
yes, not man enough.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So first I'll talk about the four lines which you mentioned. That was, just something to uplift the stories
Hmm,
and in a sense to draw out the essence.
hmm,
And I had a ball writing those four lines because, way back, like most writers, I also used to pen down poems and, you
hmm.
know, uh, even as a kid, you tend to just pick up thoughts and words that rhyme and go together. So I felt like that little girl, who used to scroll in my notebook, and I was back to doing that for my own stories. So it was fun.
It was break the
Uh,
pattern also, na?
I was, yes, yes,
It breaks
yes.
the pattern
I
of the short stories as well.
Yes, and later I was sort of the grammar part was explained to me by Shantanu. They call quatrains, the four
Yeah,
lines. So,
yeah.
I wasn't supposed to write six or eight, so I stuck to my four, and
Hmm,
I had to say what I had to say in four lines.
hmm,
Um, Coming to this story, Not Man Enough, it's really one of my all-time favorites because there is no other story like this in the entire collection. It's
hmm.
set, it has a very rural setting. It speaks about the angst and the about sexual identity, the questions of a sexual identity that a young girl is facing.
Hmm.
And there's confusion, there's doubt, there is a mix of emotions, which end a little sadly in the short story
Yeah.
version. But I must say the ebook that you're referring to
Hmm.
was a subsequent effort because there are about three or four stories in this collection which I have over the years felt I didn't do justice to in terms of not exploring all that was literally speaking to me in terms of my own characters.
Hmm.
So this was one of them, and I felt that I must make a full-length novel which explores many more shades of the characters and the plot and a whole lot of things. And perhaps you could say doesn't have a very pessimistic end either.
Right.
So, ironically, the book which came out on Women's Day in 2021
Okay.
was called Not Woman Enough instead
Yeah.
of Not Man Enough.
Yeah.
So that's the one which has actually, I would say, done more justice to the story.
Yeah.
But for this time, when I wrote Not Man Enough, it was raw, it was real, and it was very, very painful. But I
Hmm.
chose to put it down. I don't know why and where this came from. I just remember reading a newspaper item, about a young girl
Hmm.
who did feel like a girl, who
Hmm.
felt more as if she was meant to be a boy.
Yeah.
And, we are always very, we are urbanizing a lot of these concepts.
Right.
So we keep thinking that, when this happens in the city, the girl will go, she will go and get
Hmm.
herself tested and figure out what's happening to her and then decide what she wants to do,
Yeah.
or sexual orientations will change. But don't these things happen in a village? I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
What are the avenues
Hmm.
that are
Hmm.
open or available
Hmm.
to any human being who is going through this kind of a life changing sort of experience
Yeah.
and perhaps needs help? So
Okay.
there's a little bit of these thoughts
Yeah.
inside that story.
That's so relevant. I mean, we know, I mean, a lot of my friends and they say that okay, this is normal, like LGBTQ. You talk about it casually because it's normal for perhaps the people we hang out with. But
Yeah,
a lot of it, I mean, practically 90% of India has
right.
no clue what's happening and
Absolutely.
how things
Absolutely.
plan out.
Yeah,
Also, a follow-up question, that when you wrote the ebook, uh,
right.
so
Not woman
what,
enough. Yes.
yeah, not woman enough. So what was the how did your perspective change from then and now? Because see, the world is
Yeah.
now very woke, sometimes too much.
Hmm.
It is sometimes a
Yes.
lot. If you hang out on Twitter, then it is 10 times over.
Hmm.
So tell us a bit about that. Does a writer get conscious about how politically correct one has to be in these
Hmm.
topics, one has to be very careful, or just we go all out and write whatever comes to us.
See, I think it's important to go all out to start with.
Okay.
You always have the option of revising, revisiting, and editing what you have
Hmm.
written.
Hmm.
And there's, of course, a whole lot of layers of people who will go through your text
Hmm.
and caution you in case something needs to change. But I had none of those experiences, though this short story was written a quarter century ago.
Hmm.
And at that point of time, there was no consciousness about LGBTQ issues.
Right.
It just wasn't a term. This was in my 1995 collection.
I
So
can't
you
even
can
imagine, how that, I mean, how did you think about it? Because seriously, it was so alien, actually alien.
it was
We would
it
have,
was
we
quite
would have,
thin.
we would have believed in aliens. We believed in aliens, but not this, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So between then and 2021, when the e-novel came out,
Hmm.
the world had changed on
Hmm.
all these issues.
Hmm.
So I in fact felt a sense of freedom,
Hmm.
to take this story further and while retaining the emotion. It's a very father-daughter story.
Yep.
It's a story of how a father supports his daughter.
Hmm.
And, his own angst is that, is he being selfish because she could be the son he never had?
Hmm.
Or is it that he's just supporting her as a human being, as his progeny? You
Hmm.
know, so he goes through that angst, but he emerges stronger. Her own battles in fighting society,
Hmm.
particularly coming from a rural background,
Yeah.
and which has a lot more biases, to deal with in
Right.
terms of the world outside. So it became a sort of a very, very comprehensive story. It became a very complete story, which sort of took it ahead. The ending here is good for a short story,
Hmm.
but I felt there was a whole world of things to explore after that, which I did in my novel. So
It,
it gave me a lot of satisfaction.
so this is in Kindle format? Uh,
Yes,
okay.
it's available.
गाइस डू चेक इट आउट बिकॉज बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग, क्योंकि मैंने शॉर्ट स्टोरी पढ़ी है. यू शुड रीड दिस वन, एंड दिस शुड बी एक्सप्लोर्ड अदरवाइज ऑल्सो, आई मीन इन ऑल मीडियम्स, क्योंकि इसमें
Yeah.
इट साउंड्स वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग बिकॉज दिस sort of the rural perspective of it all
Yeah.
is we are yet to perhaps see. uh,
Hmm.
I mean, at least in a good way. I don't know. I can't remember
Oh, you're right.
watching or yeah,
Absolutely.
watching or
Absolutely. Yeah.
reading, but
I
क्योंकि
don't.
contemporary settings में, I mean, in the urban setting, I feel there are a lot of stories that are there out there, but ये वाला perspective, I don't think so. Cool. So I had a very cool editor over on the podcast last year, and she told me that, a lot of writers,
Hmm.
overwrite, and that really fascinated me.
Hmm.
I think I should name her Shreya Punj. She is an editor with she used to be a commissioning editor for Penguin. So she told me
Hmm.
on the podcast that overwriting is a huge sort of issue,
Hmm.
and overemphasis also, because sometimes we tend to say too much. So what is your perspective on that regarding the short stories, obviously, because one needs to, there is a length to it all, otherwise it won't be a short story. So tell us a bit about that so that we can understand this format a bit better.
Hmm. If there's one phrase that can describe the process of writing a short story, I would say it's cut to the chase, you
Okay.
know. So basically, it is an art, it is a skill to really, we are all, when we set out to write anything in any format, there is a sense of purpose. There is an author's voice. Okay, what is it that we are really trying to say? And short stories are very challenging because you've got to identify what you're trying to say and then really crisp your storytelling to be able to say it without without the length being a bother.
Yeah.
So it's a skill. I wouldn't say every story is worth being told as a short story, because I myself keep experimenting between various formats.
Yeah.
And, when an idea comes to me, I'm almost 100% clear, okay, should I develop this as a TV serial, or should I develop this as
Yeah.
a short story or a novel?
Yeah.
So it speaks to me that this is how it should be done. I've tried experimenting, but usually the gut feel is what works, what
Right.
you initially felt. For example, when you pick up an interesting concept,
Yeah.
something which doesn't have a story as yet, you could make a very good TV show out of it. If you,
Right.
I read about this concept of bride buying, for example.
Hmm.
The fact that, because in Haryana, the sex ratio is very skewed, they
Yeah.
actually get brides from elsewhere. So it
Mhm.
was just a concept. There was no
Mhm.
story. I
Right.
had to create the story, but it was speaking to me that this is a concept worth exploring.
Yeah.
Because imagine a girl coming in from, imagine Armenia
Yeah.
or Kerala
Yeah.
into Haryana. So there
Mm.
was a love story there. There was a whole lot of drama and emotion. So I knew this will make for a good sort of TV show.
Right.
And I created a show called Molki
Okay.
uh, from this.
Mm.
Uh, However, there are some things which speak to you about short and sweet. They just speak to you that, you should write it out, itna and not more. Don't try
Right.
to, the bit you were talking about
Mhm.
overwriting.
Yeah.
So, I think also what's happening with shorter attention spans is that reams and reams of description is now no longer working,
Right.
unless it's a mythological or it's a Shiva, you're talking about another galaxy altogether, where that is part of the whole uniqueness of the storytelling.
Yeah.
So we are largely talking emotion and drama. I love the short story format.
Yeah.
At the same time, I would say there are times when I feel that I won't be able to do justice to
Mhm.
this story in the short story. I need that little bit more of writing or description to do
Right.
justice to the subject
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I keep shifting formats.
Yeah.
And overwriting, I think, yes, we take ourselves very seriously sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, as my kids keep saying, just chill, you know. So I keep telling myself when I'm writing, just chill. It's fine. I mean, the universe is not going to sit in judgment about what every line that you've written.
Right.
So enjoy yourself while writing.
Yeah. I really wanted to ask you about this short story, which was the most hilarious one for me. At the same time, it is, I mean, if you go between the lines, it's not that much, but I mean, on a surface level, it was just so funny for me. It's called Screaming Silence. There are the entire setting was very sort of mundane, but the
Hmm.
drama and humor that came along with it, how you extracted that from the story, the short story, it was quite interesting. So let's tell the readers about this story a little bit. Obviously we won't tell the ending, but a little bit about this story.
Mhm. Right. So, this is a story of, again, two, three things that came together in my mind. One was, I used to notice that, every time one would go to a fine dining sort of restaurant,
Yeah.
the waiters and the staff, they would be smiling and grinning from ear to ear.
Mhm.
And I would often think to myself, their jaws must be really aching. And I don't think they mean any of this because they've got to do this from morning till night. So I was
I
just
know.
imagining that if I had that fate, I mean, I would be so frustrated because imagine dealing with a whole lot of people whom you got to smile with and you don't mean it.
Right.
So that was one strand. The other was that, a sort of a tragicomic take
Yeah.
on the fact that in a building sometimes what happens when you think that something's going on next door which may not be a good thing, and as a community, as as people with a social conscience, etc., shouldn't we all get together
Right.
to stop something like
Yeah.
this? So it's about a whole lot of women who come together because they think that there is a guy who is beating up his wife or his girlfriend every day and they're not liking it.
Yeah.
So they want to do something to stop this. Now,
Yeah.
more than this, I think I'd reveal the story, so I will
I
not.
know.
Situation is a bit is unusual and interesting,
But it's pretty
and
natural, right? I mean, I
yeah,
live in a very, old sort of mohalla setting. And
right.
there was once I had an argument with my wife, and accidentally, there was a lamp that fell off. And
Hmm.
immediately, my neighbor came along and I think so she came out of her home, and the next day in the morning when she found my wife alone, just chilling, basking in the sun, she asked her the question, like, is everything
Hmm.
okay? It
Right.
was just a
Right.
random lamp, but I think it's a good thing when people are aware in
Well,
community.
yeah. Yeah. So this was, but it was a funny take on
Yeah.
this whole situation. And uh, one very interesting aspect of this story is that it was, of course, written, it was part of my older collection.
Hmm.
And when I decided to include it in this, in Autumn Blossoms, and I read it and I said, something's not quite there. I was more politically, I was more aware of a very interesting dimension that, the abuses that we have.
Hmm.
This just didn't occur to me that many years ago.
Hmm.
The abuses we have all tend to be centered around women,
Hmm.
the MCBCs,
Hmm.
which people talk about. So
Everything.
I included that thought in the story. So I'm very this is one of the inclusions. I'm very happy and relieved
Yeah.
I got a chance to put in this
It's right here.
thought.
I think if it's right
Yeah,
here, you have
yeah,
mentioned it here
yes,
that
yes,
there was a slight shift that you made to the story, so
yes.
that it has more to give in
Yeah,
some ways, because that's more important, I think
perfectly.
so.
Yes.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
self-indulgence is always there, like for authors,
Yeah.
I suppose, with all authors. But
Yeah.
I think so the effect that it has on society and the readers is more important, I suppose. So.
Yeah, and it's very empowering for the writer,
Mm.
to feel that you have made, in your own small way, you've tried to make a difference.
Yeah,
You've tried to, share with a larger audience
yeah,
what they might not have thought of. You're
yeah.
just sort of putting the light on for them. That's it.
Yes. Okay. I am not boxing anytime soon. That's for sure. Cool. So, next up, of course, you have been experimenting with so many formats. Now, there is a tendency of sort of what I would call it as leakage from one format to other, and there may be some bad habits that might be coming from, or good ones. um
Hmm.
how does, because when you are doing so much, there are some people who are just writing for, like, are just book authors, and they are not experimenting with other formats, so they have a process, it's easier for them, I suppose. But you have so many compartments. I know it's easier for women. You guys are so sorted, and you have
Wow.
that in you. But it, if you, where is there any occasion where you have seen this sort of, habit coming along, and then quickly you realized it? Is there a specific occasion like that happening
Mm,
in terms of
right.
writing habits?
Okay. Writing habits, if you're talking about the practical part of it, I think the fact that I've done television for so long has made me, not indulgent at all. I don't
Okay.
take myself very seriously,
Okay.
honestly.
Okay.
I feel that I must have that discipline to whether I'm in the mood or in the zone, as
Hmm.
today's kids call it,
In the
or
zone.
not
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no zone. There's just which I keep describing. I said हम लोग creative मजदूर हैं
Right.
actually in
Right.
television.
Right.
So the mood and the indulgence part is out. So that's helped me actually,
Yeah.
because when you force yourself to enter a zone, very often you are able to enter the zone.
Right.
That's as far as the practical part is concerned.
Right.
I'll just give you one example of how uh, an idea which comes to you and you feel strongly about,
Hmm.
how differently you've got to adapt it for television
Okay.
and for maybe a short story.
That sounds
So
interesting.
you
Yeah.
find, yeah. So one thing which I have always felt very strongly about is, this concept we have, especially in the rural areas, about
Hmm.
witchcraft.
Ah.
You know,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
woman is branded a witch, all right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when I had to use this thought in my show,
Hmm.
I had to, create a lot more of intrigue and
Hmm.
drama. The issue was
Hmm.
the same,
Right.
to expose what is this enigmatic, creature
Hmm.
called a witch? Is she really a witch? Is
Hmm.
she pretending to be a witch? Is
Hmm.
she mad, or what's she all about?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
very fascinating.
Hmm.
So in a rural setting, when I had used it,
Hmm.
I made it into a more of a social issue, you
Right.
know,
Hmm.
where there is this woman who has been outcast she's on the outskirts of the village. She's
Hmm.
barely able to survive. She's in a bad shape. They're very stunning visuals, very disturbing visuals. I
Hmm.
had the aid of all that.
Yeah.
Whereas when I wanted to deal with that same thought of, in a short story,
Hmm.
I actually had an urban woman who goes she's a journalist.
Yeah.
There's a story called A Cure for All Ills
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah.
So here is this woman who goes into the rural setting,
Hmm.
and she's dealing with a personal crisis of her own.
Right.
And she's not found a solution to it. But when she goes into this rural setting and she
Hmm.
meets with this woman who is a so-called witch,
Hmm.
and she peels
Hmm.
off the layers of what this woman is all about,
Yeah.
she actually goes back a sorted uh, human being.
Right.
She's able to learn something
Yeah.
from this woman who has a great survival instinct.
Yeah.
So I feel the same sort of subject or the same idea
Hmm.
is used very differently in the two
Right.
places.
Yeah.
And one has to, be prepared, I would say, be open,
Hmm.
that when you are doing a show,
Hmm.
then you have to deal with that same theme. You may be wanting to say the same thing,
Yeah.
but you actually say it a little differently when
Right.
you're doing it show
Yeah.
and when you're doing it for a short story.
Yeah.
If I had to write a novel, I would do it even more
Right.
differently. So I just find this writing gymnastics very interesting.
You're so right. It is gymnastics because, like you said, that in the short story, you
Hmm.
gave it a very sort of self-reflection kind of angle, and that
Yeah,
would
yeah,
work in that format. I think so. That's a great takeaway from this conversation also, that you have to be true to the format. I mean, it's not just being very sort of blase about it and chalo, I'll write
yeah.
whatever I want to, and then it will not work because one
It will
has
not.
to understand the format. And of course, there is an audience and there's a market, of course,
Hmm.
there. One just can't ignore all of that. Totally. I mean, I know there has to be a balance, right? That's a great
Right.
takeaway from this conversation. And of course, this is the Book Nerds podcast. We want to know about the recommendations that you have, your influences. Do you get a lot of time to, delve into the reading side of you, and some writing recommendations, although you have given so many, बहुत सारे हैं इसमें. And I'm sure that when we kind of, cut this podcast up in shorter variants, uh, staying true to the format, like Instagram, it will be more rewarding for certain people because
Yeah.
सब लोग लंबा पॉडकास्ट नहीं देखते, हमें ये बात पता चल चुकी है. So give us some recommendations which you have, your influences. And we didn't talk enough about, how this bulb of yours of sort of writing got into you and, just came off. And I also don't know whether you were born, where you were born and brought up. And it's strange
Mm-hmm.
that we are talking
Okay.
about it just now because we got so involved with the book and all. It's strange, but tell us about that as well.
Okay, so yeah, that's a whole lot of questions. I'll try and keep to the
Yeah,
strain.
yeah.
Um, I was born in Delhi,
Yeah.
and up until the day I got married and came to Bombay, I have been a Delhiite.
Mm,
So I know the North Indian culture very well. Having said that, I came from a very unusual family. My father was a classical musician. He was the doyen of the Indore Gharana, as they call it.
wonderful, wonderful.
And we had a very unusual upbringing. We were going to a convent school, me and my sister
Mm,
and my brother. We were all educated in the best of schools. So we had the English education that was very aspirational
mm.
for our times.
CJM,
And
right?
yet, home,
CJM, right?
I'm from CGM, yes,
I read
CGM,
about
and
it.
that
I thought you were not born in Delhi, so it was
I,
something
I
I
was born.
missed. I
Yeah.
missed, I think so. Yeah.
So we had this sort of two very divergent sort of
Mm,
cultures
mm,
that kept pulling at us. And after my schooling, I did LSR, and then I always had this thing about writing, definitely.
yeah.
I knew I wouldn't be able to do any other there was no other calling.
Okay.
So I kept dabbling with all sorts of writing
Okay.
in school, in college. Then I did journalism at IIMC.
Mm,
I did very well. I got inducted into the Statesman and a magazine, etc. But somewhere I was extremely unhappy with
yeah.
journalism per se. It's two different worlds. It's
Yeah.
the world of facts and the world of fiction. So I guess I was never, my husband often teases me. He says, you would have been a very bad journalist if you had continued because you float into a different zone, which is
Yeah.
not what journalists are supposed to do. Anyway, so like a lot of women, I took this mommy break. I had two
Okay.
children after I got married, came to Bombay, and that quietude and that so-called frustrating phase of life when you don't have a creative outlet, you are completely sort of hemmed in with your domestic responsibilities.
Mm,
That is ironically the time that I discovered what I really wanted to do in life,
okay.
which is I wrote my first collection of short stories with my little one in the lap,
Wonderful.
rocking her.
Wonderful.
So, and at least I was very clear that
Mm,
now I'm very clear that this is what I enjoy doing.
mm,
And after that, it was the usual struggle of,
yeah.
actually proving and working very hard to make
Yeah.
up for the 7 years that I sat at home.
Yeah.
I was, in overdrive
Yeah.
to an extent. So,
Overcompensation.
overcompensation, women are so good at it.
I've
So
heard that
I,
this format of writing like daily, it's the
yeah,
toughest ever because I kind of experienced that for a bit and I was
acha.
petrified. I was not, I mean, not writing, but I was
Hmm.
just interviewing one author per day for like
Oh
uh,
my God.
100 days. So,
Oops.
and publishing it at the same time and editing it. So it was
Okay.
kind of similar, but I can imagine that if, I mean, it was tough because I didn't have much experience, but this must be so like, sounds very hectic.
It's always tougher in the beginning, but then
Mhm.
it becomes a part of your system. And I think the fact that when your shows do well and people
Ah,
appreciate it,
yeah,
it's something very heartening. It gives you
right,
that energy to go
right.
on. So I've been blessed that way, that the shows have done
Mhm.
well and people have appreciated it. That really energizes you in many ways. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of what I find about, at the risk of sounding like an old woman,
Hmm.
I find that today's generation, everyone takes themselves way too seriously. And
Okay.
the ego has therefore sort of, taken, it's really grown by leaps and bounds, to the extent when I sometimes work with assistants,
Mhm.
etc., who are young, and
Mhm.
my own kids for that
Mhm.
matter. They find it very difficult to take criticism, whereas
Mhm.
we have, sort of grown with mentors treating us very badly at times, thrashing and tearing and throwing what we have written.
Yeah.
But believe me, that's what has really chiseled us.
Yes.
So that's why I keep saying, don't take yourself so seriously, because there's a craft to every kind of writing, and the craft cannot be picked up in a day. The craft cannot be picked
Mhm.
up in a fortnight or a
Mhm.
month. You will need to be at it.
Mhm.
And as I often say, I was blessed to meet Gulzar Saab in the beginning of my career. I
Mhm.
just went to him with the first ever story that I wrote, and while he appreciated it,
Mhm.
he said that there's nothing for me to teach, but it is the fact that tumhe, he compared me with my father's art, and he
Okay.
said, whether your father has a performance in the evening or not, he
Mhm.
wakes up every morning and does 2.5 hours of riyaz.
Right.
So what writers don't do
Mhm.
is this. They feel कि अगर इसका
Mhm.
कुछ बन नहीं रहा है तो they just stop.
Ah,
Whereas the learning is a self-learning, which is just comes from the rewrite, the famous
ah,
rewrite.
rewrite.
Not the write, but the rewrite. So
Yeah.
recommendations for writing, this is what I would
I have
advise
actually,
youngsters.
you're so right that I was watching something on Instagram, famous author, and she
Hmm,
was being interviewed by a famous person. And
hmm,
again, there was this writer's block question, and I hate it. I hate it. I have written a post about it on LinkedIn. Don't ask writer's block questions because there's nothing like it. If one is
hmm,
facing writer's block, there's something wrong, seriously wrong. Because one
hmm,
needs to follow the process and kind of do that thing every day. So
hmm.
you're so right. I am so happy that you have said it. अब नाम तो क्या ही लेना मतलब author भी famous तो कुछ ले भी सकते हैं but I commented there that please
Hmm.
don't ask these questions, please don't. I need a petition for this question not to be asked.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah.
book recommendations.
I don't get as much time to read as I should be reading.
Yeah,
I'm very impressed with Elif Shafak's 40
truly.
Rules of Love.
Yeah.
It's been a recent finding for me. I know it's not that recent, but the way the author weaves between two eras, and it's so seamless.
Uh,
Uh, there are two, but there is one. It's almost like somebody's hair being plaited,
hmm,
and so I really enjoyed that book. And my dream is to write something like that, which sort of alternates between two eras, and yet the connectivity with the reader
hmm.
is, in top form at
It's
all
the
times.
toughest format, I think. So this
Very tough.
period sort
Yeah.
of blending sort of, format, and there is an
Very,
entire cult of
very
people
relevant.
who follow her. Like
Yes, yes.
she has a
Amazing.
cult following. So yeah.
Justifiably so. Hmm. Hmm.
I think so. We should do a podcast just to discuss Elif Shafak's 40 Rules of Love next time, and we'll have other readers also. I think so. We should do that.
Done. Done,
Great.
done, done.
So, anything else, or we should kind of move on to the conclusion of the session? Any other recommendation which might have impressed you, or some other writer that has impressed you in the
So
Indian
since you
scenario?
spoke about writer's block,
Mm-hmm.
again, I would like to debunk that thing a little. Yeah, you need breaks at times,
Ha.
but you don't really need to get off writing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Someone shared a very interesting analysis with me that
Mm.
there are two types of writers.
Okay.
There are architects and there are gardeners.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
So the architects are those who have the entire structure on paper,
Mm-hmm.
and in their mind there is a plan. There is
Mm.
what in practical terms, maybe we call it a chapter plan. They know
Right.
exactly how their book is beginning,
Hmm.
where it's leading, and how it's concluding.
Hmm.
So it's very, very important
Hmm.
to have that,
Hmm.
architecture of
Right.
your book.
Right.
And then there are gardeners.
Yeah.
There are gardeners who will just plant. They have the
Yeah.
seed, they will garden, they will plant the seed, and then they'll keep watering with a complete mystery as to how and in what direction that plant is going to grow. Is it
Uh-huh.
going to grow well, or is it going to flower or fruit or whatever?
Yeah.
So I think the best things, the best creations come when you have a sort of a chapter, a sort of a architecture in
Okay.
mind for your book. You can't be
Okay.
clueless. You
Right.
can't be clueless about what you're writing, and at the same time allow your spontaneity to
Hmm.
flower.
Hmm.
Because it's happened with me that I plan something out and I feel I've got it all figured. Now I'm going to write 10 pages a day of my book or whatever.
Yeah.
But by the time I finish the book and I go back to my original chapter plan, they
Hmm.
are very, very different from each other.
Wow.
So I think it's nice to sort of find that middle path
Yeah.
between being an architect and a
Hmm.
gardener. That would be my humble recommendation for
It's not
writers.
at all humble at all, because this is the perfect 2 cents I've gotten from any author for a year at least. It is amazing what you have said just now, because there are so many, these softwares, writing softwares for
Yeah,
authors,
yeah,
like
yeah.
Scrivener, where there is an entire architecture sort of, you can plan it out and then just, keep writing. At least for people who write online, and
Mm,
in the e-format. And that's so relevant because it, it's a great process to have. And of course,
mm,
there are some people who just get down to business and they are high and not literally high, just, high on words or something and just put down everything. But a great tip for writing professionally over a period of time to just be an
right.
architect.
Yeah.
And yeah, great.
First be an architect and then be a gardener.
Yes, then be a gardener. Truly.
Yeah, yeah,
Great
yeah.
words. I hope my long pending book, eventually comes out because of these tips. So thank you so
I'm
much.
sure it will. Sure.
I
Wish you
think
all the
so.
best.
I suppose.
Mm.
Okay. Autumn Blossoms, readers, book nerds, do check it out. Of course, there is a lot of work from Gajra out there. Check it out on Amazon. सब कुछ शायद Amazon पे ना दिखे. Storytel पे भी है, Kindle format में भी है. थोड़ा सा सर्च मारना Google पे, मिल जाएगा सब कुछ. मैंने भी इसी तरह ढूंढा था. So just go there, check it out. Do leave reviews. They are very important for all authors, and it also encourages them. Gardener हो, architect हो, encouragement सबको चाहिए. So, uh, thank you so much for, sharing all that experience, writing experience of yours, talking about this book, Autumn Blossoms. There is so much content in here. Guys, read it and you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a lot. It's a marathon and you'll love it. And you can read it in parts. That's the fun thing. It's not a novel, it's a short story format. Not many people are doing it well. Go read it, and you'll appreciate it. बाकी feedback हमें भी देना DM में, Instagram वगैरह हर जगह. And yeah, thank you so much, Gajra, for taking out this entire hour for us. And we hope to, read your other work and get to know your writing side better. And हाँ, पुराने serial भी देखेंगे अब जाके वापस. So
बिल्कुल देखिए.
yes,
This
thank you
has
so
been
much.
wonderful. It's not felt formal at all. I love the style. I love the ease of the entire podcast. So more strength to you, book
Thank you so
nerds.
much, and looking forward to hosting you in person also. There's a format that happens in person as well, which will be more sort of giving. I am pretty sure about it. Perhaps I'll come to Bombay and shoot with you. That's always on the wish
Yeah.
list. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on the Book Nerds podcast. Happy New Year 2024. Great kickoff, and looking forward to so much more. Thank you. Happy reading.
Thank you. Stay blessed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye.